The desert wind always had a way of carrying secrets. Some whispered through the cottonwoods, some drifted along the riverbanks, and some were screamed out loud by folks who never lived long enough to tell the tale. But the story I'm about to share with you isn't about death or vengeance. It's about something far rarer in the West. It's about fate. My name ain't important, at least not right now. What matters is that you've stepped into Frontier Echoes, where the frontier is alive, the past walks beside us, and each story brings you closer to the raw heart of the Wild West. Saddle up, because this one changed my life forever. I used to believe the Rio del Norte was my friend. She gave me water, gave me fish, even gave me shelter when Apache raiding parties chased me into the canyon. But that river had a cruel side. Fast, cold, and unpredictable. One wrong step and she'd swallow a full-grown man whole. That morning, I had no idea she would demand a life, or that I'd be the one to bargain with her. I was riding back from the settlement at Willow Bend, a sack of flour tied behind the saddle, a coil of rope, and a tin cup dangling and clanking with every trot of my Mustang. The sun was barely up when I reached the river crossing. Usually by then the river ran calm, but days of distant mountain rain had thickened her flow. The current was high, restless, shoving logs and broken branches downstream like toys. I paused at the bank, judging the depth. That's when I heard it, the faintest cry, like a small animal caught in brush. At first I thought it was a coyote pup, or maybe the wind. But then it came again, higher, sharper, desperate. I kicked my boots out of the stirrups and slid off the horse. The cries were coming from a patch of reeds downriver, where the current chopped and tangled around a half-submerged log. I ran. The mud sucked at my boots as I pushed through, heart thundering, and then I saw her. A girl. No older than 16, maybe 17. Apache, judging by her beaded dress and raven-black hair plastered over her face. She looked half-drowned already, trapped between the currents, clinging to that drifting log as though it were the last solid thing in the world. Every second carried her closer to the rapids, where jagged rocks waited like the teeth of a monster. I shouted to her, but she didn't respond. Maybe she didn't understand me, maybe she couldn't hear. I threw off my coat, dropped my hat, and tied one end of my lariat around a sturdy cottonwood trunk rooted into the riverbank. My fingers were shaking, not from fear, but from the knowledge that I had seconds, maybe less. I plunged into the water. The cold hit like a punch straight to my ribs. My breath tore out of me, and for a moment I could barely move. The current grabbed my legs, dragging me sideways, but I forced myself forward. I swam, kicking hard, the rope tight against my waist. Water filled my ears, my nose, my throat. When I surfaced again, I was 50 feet from where I jumped in and still struggling to reach her. She was slipping. Her hands were turning white from how hard she was gripping the log. I shouted again, hoping she'd at least see me, but her eyes were barely open. I reached her just as her fingers gave out. She slipped under the surface. My heart stopped. I lunged, grabbed a fistful of her dress, and yanked her up. She sputtered, coughing water, trembling violently as I wrapped my arm around her chest and kicked toward the shore. But the current wasn't done fighting me. It pulled us downstream, tugging harder and harder until I felt the rope scraping around my waist, burning my skin. The knot held, but it felt like I was being torn in half. The river spun us sideways. My foot smashed against a rock underwater, pain shooting through my ankle. Another wave hit us, slamming her against my shoulder. She moaned, weak, exhausted. I kept kicking. Kept pulling. Kept fighting. The river didn't want to let her go. But I wasn't negotiating. The current gave one last violent surge before the rope snapped tight and swung us toward the bank. My fingers clawed into mud and roots as I dragged her onto the shore. I collapsed beside her, chest heaving, water pouring out of my lungs. For a moment, neither of us moved. Only the river moved, raging, angry, cheated. I lifted her gently, turned her on her side, and water spilled from her mouth as she coughed and gasped for air. She was alive. Barely, but alive. I carried her to my horse, wrapped her in my coat, and propped her against the saddle. She looked at me with those dark eyes, wild, frightened, but grateful. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a whisper I couldn't understand. I just nodded and started walking toward my cabin, leading the horse through the brush. That girl had no idea who I was. But by sunset the entire Apache band would know who she had been saved by. I lived alone in the hills, a mile from the river, in a cabin I'd built with my own hands. By the time we arrived, the girl was drifting in and out of consciousness. I lit the fire, heated a pot of water, and laid her on my bed. Her skin was freezing, her lips pale, her breathing shallow. Saving her from drowning was one thing. Saving her from fever was another. I stripped off her soaked dress, trying my best to keep my eyes respectful, and wrapped her in dry blankets. I gave her sips of warm water, rubbed her arms and legs to bring back color, and prayed she hadn't swallowed too much river. She slept through the night. And the next day, I kept checking the window, half expecting Apache warriors to come storming in. They didn't. Either they didn't know where she was, or they had troubles of their own. On the second evening, she woke up. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly focusing on the firelight. When she saw me, she tensed, clutching the blanket tightly to her chest. I raised my hands to show her I meant no harm. "You're safe," I said. "You almost drowned. I pulled you out." She didn't understand all my words, but she understood my tone. Her breathing softened. She sat up weakly and touched her chest. "Naili," she said. I guessed it was her name. "Naili," I repeated. She nodded. Then her gaze softened in a way I didn't expect. She touched my arm lightly, just 2 fingers, gentle, grateful. That moment felt like a promise without language. I never intended what happened next. But after that day, she never left my side. By the time she recovered fully, Naili had learned several English words: water, fire, horse, sleep. Enough to tell me she had slipped on wet rocks while gathering reeds by the river. Enough to tell me her family had moved camp earlier and she'd gotten separated. But she didn't leave to look for them. Every morning when I woke up, she was already tending the fire. When I chopped wood, she gathered the pieces. When I rode into town for supplies, she followed, sometimes on foot, sometimes riding behind me, her hands lightly resting on my coat. People stared. Some whispered. A few men warned me quietly that Apaches didn't take kindly to their women living with white men. But whenever I suggested taking her back to her people, she shook her head fiercely and said the same word, again and again. No. I didn't push her. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't confused. She simply chose to stay. One morning, as the first snow dusted the pines, she stood in the doorway of the cabin with a solemn expression. She held a small leather pouch, decorated with beads and feathers. Without a word, she stepped close, took my hand, and pressed the pouch into my palm. A gift. I opened it and found a carved bone pendant shaped like a hawk. She touched her chest, then touched mine, and said softly, "You save me. I stay." Her voice trembled. My heart did too. I'd saved her life. But I hadn't expected she'd give me hers. A week later, the Apaches found us. I was chopping wood near the cabin when I heard horses approaching. 6 warriors rode out of the pines, bows drawn, eyes burning with suspicion and anger. Naili came rushing out of the cabin when she heard them. She ran straight to my side, placing herself between me and their arrows. The chief dismounted. Older, stern, with scars across his arms. He barked something in Apache. Naili answered quickly, her voice strong and sure. She pointed at the river, mimicked drowning, then pointed at me. For a long moment, the chief just stared. Then he stepped forward and looked me dead in the eyes. He spoke slow, heavy English. "You save my daughter." Daughter. Suddenly everything made sense, the pouch, the warriors, her refusal to leave. I swallowed hard and nodded. He studied me silently. Then his gaze shifted to Naili, and he said something soft to her. Something that made her eyes well up with tears. She shook her head, grabbed my arm tightly, and pressed herself against me. I understood, even without the words. She didn't want to go. The chief let out a slow breath and turned back to his men. They lowered their bows. Then he faced me and laid a hand on my shoulder. "You treat her well," he said. "She choose path." Those 3 words, "she choose path," settled everything. Before they rode off, Naili's father looked back once more, lifting his chin in a gesture of respect. I returned it. After that day, she never questioned where she belonged. She belonged with me. Winter passed. Spring came. The river thawed, gentler this time, like it remembered the life we'd stolen back from it. Naili learned more English. I learned Apache words. We laughed at our mistakes, shared stories, tended the garden, hunted rabbits, rode into town where folks eventually stopped staring. One evening she asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Why you save me? River take many. You go in. Why?" I looked at her, her dark hair glowing in the firelight, her eyes soft as canyon dusk. "I didn't think," I said. "I just knew I couldn't watch someone die." She smiled, small, warm, real. "You save me," she whispered. "Now I save you." "From what?" She placed her hand over my heart. "From being alone." I didn't have an answer. Not then. Maybe not ever. But I squeezed her hand gently. She didn't need my answer. She already knew. Life has a strange way of tying souls together. Sometimes it's by blood. Sometimes by war. And sometimes by a single moment, one desperate gasp beside a raging river. I didn't expect to risk my life that morning. I didn't expect to pull an Apache girl from the mouth of death. I certainly didn't expect that she would stay by my side, through good days, hard winters, long rides, and quiet nights under the stars. But she did. Everywhere I went. Every trail. Every town. Every sunrise. Because once upon a time, she was lost in the river. I risked my life to save her. And now, she follows me everywhere. If you enjoyed this tale, stay close to Frontier Echoes. There are many more stories on the trail ahead, stories of courage, fate, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the dust and danger of the Wild West. Saddle up for the next adventure. The frontier is wide, and the echoes never fade.